actually happens to people in the midst of serious illness? What is that experience like? And what is it that we really need to pay attention to? And so to help in the shift, to attune ourselves to really focusing in on what it is that we're going to do in our local institutions, the next panel focusing on California, we have the pleasure to have with us a speaker, Ms. Morin Green. If you've looked in your program, you saw that she has extensive experience as an oncology and a hospice nurse. She's an advocate in end-of-life care. But the reason that she's here today is not because of that. It's actually she's here today because she has experience as the wife of Michael Morin and the mother of Nicholas, Casey, and Marissa Morin. And for the next few minutes, what she's going to share with us is a story about her husband Michael's illness and what that experience was like for her children, and for their family, because that's actually what we need to keep in mind whenever we're having any of these conversations. So please join me in welcoming Karen.
Thank you for inviting me here today. I was with you all in 2016 for this conference in Los Angeles, and I'm really honored to be here to share my story. Our connections to healthcare are very important, and it means that the people in our lives, our friends and family, call us when they have a medical or an insurance question, or they need an appointment somewhere. My story is about when that personal and professional collide, as many of you here, I'm sure, have experienced. There are times when we try and do both. The professionals will tell us to take off your hat, take off that medical hat, and be the daughter, the son, the partner, the wife. Just be the patient. Forget what you know. But once you're taught to think like a medical professional, you can't turn it off. I started in high school. I was a nurse's aide after school, and then I went to Georgetown and got a degree in radiologic technology and was working in technology and R&D in the early days of CT scanning. I know that ages me here a bit, but I was working with the manufacturers in R&D and traveling to install scanners across the country, living in DC when I met Michael. He would become my husband. He was a litigator at Justice. A year later, a law firm moved us to LA. It was 1983. In 85, 87, and 90, brought 2 boys and a girl. And when the kids were in preschool, I went back to school and got my RN. By 2006, I had worked on an AIDS unit, oncology, and a bone marrow transplant unit, and then worked in home hospice for about 5 years. I had stopped working full-time when my husband, a litigator in a big law firm, and 3 teenagers needed me at home much more. But I was working part-time running support groups for metastatic cancer patients and caregivers and listening as they described their fears and frustrations dealing with the medical system and their family members. As I look back on that year now, those small signs that I missed over and over again, too late, I noticed, but they never connected to one another. My husband had a long scrape on the side of his car, but he never mentioned it. And this single-digit golfer, the last time we played golf, he wasn't hitting any of the fairways. And his balance and swing were off, but I ignored it. I chalked it up to being too busy to play golf and the stress of a pending breakup with a 20-year law partner. He just wasn't himself. His personality had changed slowly and slightly, and I didn't notice it. This warm, generous, outgoing, witty, and funny man had become quiet and withdrawn. The life of the party, the DJ who knew every rock and roll song, had nothing to say at all. He had become quiet and withdrawn, but I hadn't noticed yet. Actually, all of his family and friends were noticing it at the same time, but I hadn't. We'd always been the house where everyone gathered for the weekend parties. The 4th of July parade started on our front lawn. It was one of those nights when we had gathered for dinner. The next day, friends called. What are you doing about Michael? What's going on? Who are you seeing? I'd called his internist, actually, that week. He was close to this guy. He had helped him set up his concierge practice. And I called him again. What's going on? He said, I'm trying to get him into a neurologist, but it's going to take another few weeks. I said, a neurologist, the first thing he's going to do is order a CT scan. Order a scan now. So the scan was done. And then I can remember that spot in the living room. There was no sit down. No, I have news. It's like we were passing. I was going somewhere, and he was coming in the house, and he stopped me. He said, I have a tumor. And that's where things changed permanently. He was 53 and I 50. Both of our parents were alive, and we had never gone through anything like this. I'm not sure it was quite that dramatic, but pretending that something hadn't been wrong for a long time, all of a sudden, I had thought that maybe he was just under too much stress at work. But now it was real. Michael had had Hodgkin's at 16 and had mantle radiation as his only treatment. He'd missed a year of high school and had no other issues. But it was always in the back of my mind. What were we taught? The number one risk for cancer was having a previous cancer. I was so mad at this internist. The first opportunity to be there, to support him, to be the nurse, the wife, I had been denied. Had the internist called him to bring me to the appointment, and he had just not called me? Anyway, it was Friday. Why do these things always happen on Fridays? We had the CT scans, and actually had spent the evening that night at dinner with a friend who was an oncologist. So Monday, we were off to the surgeon. I got this, I said. I got this. I know what to do. I put on my nurse hat and my patient advocate hat. I can do this. There are two types of people. There are those that keep things to themselves, and then people are shocked when they find out, and those that share and are comforted by their friends. You can tell which ones we were. We had insurance, good insurance, and so we had choices where to go. As it turned out, the tumor was inoperable. Where we went, we were in LA. We went to a number of teaching hospitals. I am lost now at why we chose where we went to. I had worked at one of these hospitals, and we knew surgeons at both of them. There was such a competition about where to have this surgery, which really wasn't a surgery. It was just a biopsy to figure out what it was and what it wasn't. It wasn't a glioblastoma. It was an anaplastic astrocytoma. Good. Slow growing, and we had options: radiation, some chemo, 5 to 10 years, they were telling us. So our new reality began. Treatment, radiation. First, there was extraditing him from this 20-year law partnership that had been fracturing for quite some time. It became clear that this exceptional litigator had been losing his mental acuity for quite some time. Our friends had noticed this huge change in him, but why hadn't his colleagues or business partners and his long-standing secretary noticed anything and bothered to mention it? As we dealt with the dissolution of his partnership and the reality of him not working again, I was overwhelmed by the idea of money. I felt so guilty. I was a nurse. I could take care of him. But this idea of money and 5 to 10 years, and how would we handle it? We were into COBRA, sure, but that would only last so long. He did have some disability insurance, and of course here in California, you could get disability. But that was not going to cut it for us. We had 3 kids, 2 in college, 1 in Arizona and 1 in Wisconsin, and of course my daughter, the junior in high school, was the first one to go to private school. How did that happen? We had a house and 3 cars. I had stopped working full time. So our parents, we had helped my parents, and his parents were retired and on a fixed income. But we got going. We knew we could deal with it. We did radiation, Avastin. We had lots of steroids, and then there were complications from the steroids, bladder tumors. And as the caregiver, I began to have my own issues, crippling migraines. We would both lie in the living room, he on one couch and I on another, and not only did I have headaches, but aphasia and constant vomiting. At one point during one of these bouts, a friend had dropped me off at the ER. I don't remember quite too much. I was admitted and remember Michael there, but he really wasn't driving, so how he got there and got home, we'll never know. I woke up later intubated, confused, of course, but as I took stock of my position, I assumed I had been in a car accident. It was a day or two before I was extubated and understood that I had been in the ICU over 2 weeks and had aspiration pneumonia from the migraines. My dear husband had figured out how to get home, but had not thought to call any family members to tell them where I was. It took a while for my East Coast family to figure out what had happened, and they headed to LA and spent the month to try and get me well. My daughter tells of feeling like an orphan lost as one parent was in the ICU and her dad became less and less of himself each day. A college essay, to be sure. But my family was here for the month, and we were grateful for our friends and family and community and the temple that came around us and our freezer full of food. The rabbi was very close to Michael, and he was continuing to decline despite all the treatment. By this time, I needed a caregiver to help move him, to dress him. In May of 2007, we went to Tucson for my eldest son's college graduation. 4 years or less. We never thought that would happen. So it meant a lot to get us all there. But Michael needed total care and help through it all. What should have been an especially wonderful time for all of us was bittersweet as we realized what we were all facing and the critical realization that things were not getting better at all. The next MRI, the tumor had grown and expanded past the tentorium. One more tried treatments, and by the next appointment, it was extremely difficult to get him to ambulate, to follow instructions, to get him even in the car. Our wonderful neuro-oncologist saw this and laid Michael down. The trauma of each of these moments, the moment I knew that he had a tumor, and the moment, the day we were told there was nothing more they could do. As a hospice nurse, I knew, I had always thought I wasn't going to be one of those caregivers that waited too long. I wanted to be able to take advantage of all that hospice had to offer, and I wasn't going to wait until the last moment. My experience had been that people waited too long. Doctors didn't refer, and often that you had to be the ones to ask for it. Patients didn't get what they needed. But here we were saying it was time, and I was finding out all the reasons not to call hospice. I wanted my kids to be involved. I didn't want to call on our anniversary. But in the end, we did. Michael was at home, and he was surrounded by family and friends and his wonderful rock and roll music. Michael died 5 days after our 24th wedding anniversary, a month after Nick's graduation, and only 13 months after his diagnosis. In the end, the ironic thing was that my fear was that Michael's illness wasn't what it was going to happen or how I would deal with it. I had that. But my biggest fear was how I was financially going to be able to support him and take care of him and take care of our kids and provide for them, colleges and weddings and all those things. In the end, just as the patients I work with today, their biggest fear was the quality of life and being able to be a financial burden on their families. Michael could die in peace because he had been sick before and he knew it might happen again. He had life insurance, and in the end, I now am able to spend time and volunteer with people and help them through the end of life because my husband, Michael, was able to plan and have life insurance and was prepared so that I may be an advocate for others through this. Thank you.